welcome you with love. And this is a real exciting time because we're finally doing the next step in our training of diabetes prevention teachers. We have programs in 5 countries in Africa and in Mexico and in Brazil, and this is a training program to empower you folks. Okay, that's key. I've been working with diabetes since 1973. You can kind of do the math of that, and you see we're looking at 35 years, 45 years of working on this, and I'm giving you a very condensed experience so you can best work with the populations that you're working with. This is me at my home in Patagonia, Arizona, not Patagonia, Argentina, and we're up in the mountains. And we read this: when health is absent, wisdom can't reveal itself. That's the key. This is from the Tree of Life Foundation, and that's me. There is a cure for diabetes. That's the book that is translated into the different languages. And here's the key. Diabetes is a huge disease going on in our world. And by 2050, they're projecting that 1 out of 3 people in the United States will have diabetes. And in some places in the United States, like in the border of Texas, we're actually talking about 1 out of 2. So it's a huge problem. Diabetes is the #1 cause of adults being blind. It's the #1 cause of kidney failure. And it's the #1 cause of surgical amputations from what happens of the degeneration of the blood vessels that happens in diabetes. So it's quite profoundly bad news. 3/4 of the people who have diabetes actually die of heart disease. So we're looking at major things. Now this is the belief system, and it's totally wrong. But this is what people believe. The New York Times, diabetes has no cure. That's totally wrong, but that's what they believe. It's progressive and fatal. Diabetes is an incurable disease. It is an urgent health problem in the Latino community. Well, it is an urgent health problem in the Latino community, but it is not incurable. That's the American Diabetic Association. That's how much they know. There's a problem. The allopathic approach doesn't work. So in their experience, it's not curable. My experience, it's very curable. In fact, we heal 61% of type 2 diabetics who aren't on insulin in 3 weeks. That's very curable. And 24% of type 2 diabetics who are on insulin, we get them off insulin and into a blood sugar, fasted blood sugar of less than 100, so which is defined as non-diabetic, in 3 weeks. So obviously, if you know what you're doing, it's curable. Now, our goal today is to help you best know what you're doing. You're not a physician, and I'm not expecting you to have a total program there, but we're giving you an idea that it is curable and it is reversible. And that's worth communicating to the people around you. So, the American Diabetic Association says diabetes is an incurable disease that affects the body's ability to produce or respond properly to insulin. Okay, same thing. It isn't incurable. But belief systems are powerful, and many doctors believe it. But since that it's not curable, but since my work has come out since 2007, 11 years ago, that has actually begun to shift. So there are more and more doctors who are actually understanding is that it's reversible and potentially curable. And that's really exciting. You can see it's a world pandemic. These areas are more intensely with diabetes. And look at these. Here's Brazil here, here's Mexico. And now we're looking forward, and we can see suddenly Mexico and Brazil and Middle East, some places in Africa have greatly increased amounts of diabetes, close to 20% of the population. That's what they're estimating in 2025. So our role is to prevent that from happening, and it can be done. And this, you folks are the ones that can make a difference. Now here's what I'm talking about in America. We have all the resources. Diabetes is sweeping so strongly in America. Let's not give them bicycles, let's give them wheelchairs. Because they're getting, everybody's going to have amputations. And I will tell you that in the Native American communities, 90% of the people have diabetes, and a lot of people have amputations. So it's very, very real. Very, very real. Okay, so we can look at North America, we'll look at Cuba, and we can see that this is the female, this is male, that a very high percentage, almost 88% of the people with type 2 diabetes are overweight percentage. And here we are in Latin America and Caribbean, again, about 80% of the women and 75% of the men are overweight. And so what we're seeing is that it's really a problem. So being overweight is part of the problem we see with diabetes. And here we are looking at wheelchairs, okay? Literally, in the U.S. in 2014, they had pretty good statistics. About 30 million people had diabetes, and about 86 million people had pre-diabetes. Again, these are reversible, but what happens is each year, it's about 600,000 people in the U.S. who will get foot ulcers, and about 80,000 of them will require amputation. So we're talking a big deal. Now, once there's an amputation, people usually die within 5 years. So we get how serious it is and how you can help. Now, I'm going to give you a definition of diabetes that you don't really get in medical school and so forth. But it's, once you understand this, this will help you a lot. First, it's a chronic, degenerative, aging, inflammatory process. Chronic degenerative. Okay? It's accelerated aging. It has a genetic component, as I mentioned. So if people have diabetes in their family, type 2 diabetes in their family, or with relatives, they're going to have a higher rate of possibly getting it if they don't change their diet. Now here's the key. You can prevent getting it if you change your diet. We're not saying you should be fatalistic. So keep that in mind. It's very important for people to say, well, my father had it, my mother had it, my cousins have it, so why, I'm going to probably get it. No. If you change your diet and your lifestyle, you do not need to get it. So that's the key, really important. And epigenetic is about the change. So we have genetic. Hey, you have a genetic tendency, that's fine. And epigenetic is by changing your lifestyle, by changing your diet, by taking sugar out and animal fat out, which are two big causes of type 2 diabetes, you can greatly diminish your chances of getting diabetes. So we have some power. Now, leptin and insulin are hormones, and they regulate the metabolism of sugar. Okay, we're not getting into all the mechanisms because that's not the point. Leptin is made by our fatty tissues. That's why people who are overweight, they're putting an excess of leptin, and people get leptin resistant and they can't respond to the leptin. So that's the thing that really helps. Okay? Think about diabetes as a chronic, inflammatory, aging disease. If you understand that, it all will make much more sense. Because then our job is to turn off that process. Okay? Now, the diet is most important. So diet high in white flour, white sugar, fructose, glucose, trans fatty acids that come from animal fat, junk foods, cooked animal fat, cooked animal protein, all accelerate the rate of getting diabetes. That's really the key thing. And if the diet is low in fiber, which is what you get when you have a meat-centered diet, and you're stressed, and you're overweight, and you're not exercising, and you're not getting enough sleep, you're exposed to toxic pesticides and herbicides, and heavy metals, you are more likely to get diabetes. And our job is to counsel people about those things. If they can avoid those in their life, they can decrease their potential of getting diabetes if on the screening we see that they have a fasting blood sugar of 100 or above. Okay? So that's the key. And that's your job. So this epigenetic memory. Now that's a fancy term, but what it means is the body has a body memory and it continues to work in a way to bring us towards diabetes unless we turn off the epigenetic switch. That's the key, epigenetic switch, because the diabetes process is when the epigenetic switch has been turned on and we're activating the physiology of diabetes. And I'm going to mention here, you see the word inflammatory cytokine. Those are released by the fatty tissues that inflame the whole system. And inflammation drives aging and drives diabetes, type 2 diabetes, which is chronic, degenerative, accelerated aging. Diabetes type 2 takes between 10 and 19 years off your life. That's the key thing to understand. If we're going to treat it, we have to address all the levels of this epigenetic program. And the reason I'm talking about it this way is so you can see that it's more than saying don't eat sugar. Okay? And I'm going to use the word metabolic memory. Okay? So how do we turn off that metabolic memory that drives diabetes? And how do we regenerate the beta cells of the pancreas which make insulin? That's what we're looking at. We want to regenerate the beta cells, the insulin-producing cells, and we want to turn off the metabolic memory that keeps this inflammation, this degenerative inflammation going. So we look at the diabetes thing, and that is a driving force for diabetes because it creates inflammation and produces excess leptin. Okay, now probably most doctors don't even know the term leptin. It's not what I was taught in medical school, but it's a key hormone that's released by the fatty tissues that says if we have an excess, it says eat more food and hold on to your fat. What they've also found, and we're not talking a lot about type 1 diabetes, which is an autoimmune problem. It's very different. But it seems that 88% of the people who have type 1 diabetes and autoimmune disease are producing some insulin and actually have insulin-producing cells. Now that, of course, is very exciting. And that's why we, in our 3-week program, heal 21% of type 1 diabetics. So when you come across a type 1 diabetic, you want to give them some hope, but they have to work extra hard. But the better their diet is, the more control they have. And that's the important idea here. So there is hope if you're type 1 diabetic. We get 21% healed in 3 weeks, 31% off insulin, which is a lot in 3 weeks. And this is a picture of the duct in the pancreas, okay? And that's where the insulin flows through. And what we see is the beta cells are producing insulin, and people with type 1 diabetes are indeed producing beta cells. So again, it's positive and hopeful. This is what our first study in 2007. These people, some of them could barely walk and focus at the beginning. It was 1 month on just live food. And these two people have type 1 diabetes. And he's diabetes free now since 2007. And they all got their blood sugars down. This is the top of the mountain that was behind me. It's about 6,000 feet high. And this is them walking to the top of the mountain. It can be done in a very focused program in a short time. Now, it's important to understand the body has a memory. You can call it a metabolic memory, but basically in Australia they found that the genes remember if you're exposed to sugar, like you have some sugar, white sugar in your food, they will remember it for 2 weeks, and what happens is that the DNA expression that is supposed to protect you from sugar and inflammation gets switched off, and you end up craving, according to this research, sugar for about 2 weeks. So if you're going to keep having sugar every few weeks, you're going to keep this craving for sugar going. That's important to understand. Now, I call it crimes against wisdom, but there are a series of things that truly accelerate the process of developing. You don't catch diabetes, but you develop it, mostly through your diet. So high sugar, white flour, but I'm going to say glucose and fructose all accelerate getting diabetes. Fructose, that's more than 25 grams a day, is definitely going to cause a problem. High animal fat, high animal protein, meat consumption, all accelerated. People who are vegetarians actually have 35 to 50% less type 2 diabetes than those people eating meat, fish, and chicken, okay, and dairy. So I want to be clear about that. Being overweight, as I mentioned, being overweight, you are making inflammatory cytokines, which inflames the system, accelerates aging and diabetes, and you're making an excess of leptin, which makes the body kind of resistant to it and creates hormonal imbalances. Soft drink consumption is really bad. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. In some cultures, we offer soft drink as kind of a nice way of honoring a guest, but actually it isn't such a nice way. But we'll get into it. Watching television. They found that men who watch television for more than 17 hours a week have an increased rate of diabetes. Antibiotics, which we'll talk about. If you have 3 to 4 antibiotic treatments in 15 years, you will actually increase your rate of getting diabetes by 50%. So antibiotics aren't really harmless. Statin drugs are probably still available, but they seriously increase the rate of diabetes somewhere between 40 and 80%. Pretty serious. Vaccines. This is type 1 diabetes, but they many of them cause an autoimmune response, and that can seriously increase your rate of diabetes up to 147%. We're not going to be as focused on type 1 diabetes, but just to know vaccines are associated with a significantly increased rate of type 1 diabetes. Milk before 4 months, cow's milk, is also associated with a significant increase in type 1 diabetes because it activates an autoimmune response that creates the degenerative type 1. Agrochemicals, pesticides, herbicides, and so forth, all are associated with increased rates of diabetes. Agent Orange is increased with that. Cigarettes are increased with a 20% rate in diabetes. Low fiber foods like meat, fish, chicken, and dairy accelerated. Mental stress is associated with increasing it. Lack of exercise is another thing. How much exercise people need to do? Walk fast for 30 minutes 4 times a week. It's not a lot of exercise, but it's enough to make your body work in a healthy way. Wheat, soy, and excited toxins. Now, excited toxins are important. We'll talk more about that when we talk about soft drinks. But wheat and soy generally double the rate of diabetes. Okay? Cell phones, EMFs, constantly being used can also increase the rates of diabetes. Not getting enough sleep. We need somewhere between 7 and 8 hours sleep a night, and even if you miss 1 or 2 nights, your blood sugar will go up 10 or even 20 points if you aren't getting at least 7 hours sleep. Now that's a hard one for a lot of people, but that's really, really important. Radiation, which we're not going to talk a lot about, has been associated with a 200% increase in type 1 and type 2 diabetes. That's studies from Chernobyl and Fukushima. So that's not a lot what you can talk to people about because you're exposed to it, you're not, so to speak. Psychotropic drugs, psychiatric drugs, in other words, have been shown to increase the rate of type 2 diabetes and depression. Depression, a severe depression, within a year, that you have about 60 to 80%, depending on the study, increase in rates of type 2 diabetes. Now, these are the big factors. I just kind of ran through it in a big way. All this is in my book, but I'm giving you an overview. But the bottom line makes it real simple. Diet and exercise work better than some of the top oral medications for diabetes, such as metformin. So, in other words, a lifestyle intervention, which is what you've been trained to, which is what we're talking about, okay, had 58% success versus 31% with metformin, which is a commonly used medication to lower the blood sugar. What we're saying, and this empowers you, is that non-drug approaches have superior results in reversing diabetes than drug-based approaches. That's key. They found at least a 50% drop in risk if people improve their diet and lifestyle, if they are trained that way. So even you may be talking to someone, you tell them all the right things, and they don't do it, there's still a 50% drop, because education is that important. So that's why I emphasize that, put that in, is that educating people how to prevent diabetes actually improves their chances of getting diabetes by 50% less. So that's very cool. If they don't do anything, okay? And here's another study with 500 people. Now, the risk of diabetes was decreased by 50 to 60%, but even if they only did 1 out of 5 things. So being educated, okay, even if you see them not totally following it, somehow just the act of education, which tells you how important your job is. Your job is really important here. Just educating people, just talking to people can decrease their risk of getting diabetes by 50 to 60%. That is significant. You, even just talking, I want to emphasize that, you make a difference. And you're out there to make that difference, which is very exciting. So that's the key to understand that lifestyle, diet and exercise is more powerful than medications, even if people don't really follow all that you're telling them. Okay, so this is the exciting thing. Now, if people actually follow your advice, which is always nice, the pre-diabetic group had literally 0 diabetes. There was 100% drop in risk. So, hey, you're giving your advice, it's good to know that will give you a 50% result whether they follow a whole lot or not. But think how wonderful it is that if they actually follow your advice, you're going to decrease the chance of getting diabetes by 100%. That's incredibly good news. And you make a difference. That's what I'm saying. You make a difference. So don't think your words are being wasted. You make a difference. And if you actually follow your advice, doing 80% of what you tell them, 100% decrease in diabetes. So please understand that. Okay? Now, a lot of people don't understand this, but animal fat is a major cause of type 2 diabetes. Now, actually, around before World War II, they actually had that understanding. It was actually only in 1975 that they see that sugar, white sugar, was extremely important. So really, both are important. Animal fat, animal protein, and white sugar are your big players. So how does that work? So first, animal fat gets inside the cell. No, I say animal fat. I didn't say plant fat. They are actually different. So when I mean animal fat, I mean animal fat, not just fat in general. That's very important to understand and explains why people who are on a vegan diet, who are just on a plant-based diet only, will have 35 to 50% less diabetes, because they're not eating animal fat or animal protein, which increases the rate of getting diabetes. Wow, that's pretty good. So, animal fat blocks the insulin inside. It interferes with that inside the cell. It interferes with the action of insulin. And it also blocks the insulin receptor sites. And for that reason, animal fat makes our muscles and our liver resistant to insulin, which means the pancreas has to make more and more insulin until it gets exhausted, trying to overcome the insulin resistance. Okay, and that's the key in understanding that animal fat creates insulin resistance or insensitivity, and it takes place over a period of years. Okay, and that's important. It may take 10 years to build up to the fact before we go into diabetes. And that's just creating exhaustion of the pancreas and fighting the resistance to its function. That's the key. So, when animal fat builds up inside our organs and our cells, and we have an excess of glucose and fructose, these are the big forces that seriously increase the rates of diabetes. So, I want to just repeat again. I'm being repeating so you really get it. Animal fat kills the beta cells of the pancreas. The beta cells are what make insulin. Okay? So when we decrease animal fat, we decrease the rate of death of the beta cells of the pancreas, and therefore we decrease insulin resistance. Fat blocks, animal fat blocks insulin metabolism. So increased intake of saturated animal fat is a real problem. Now, I also want to emphasize again, animal fat actually destroys the beta cells, particularly fat from fish. Definitely has the worst effect on the beta cells. Okay? And animal fat blocks the insulin receptors on the cells, and it blocks insulin signaling because they communicate, and what we call the GLUT4 insulin receptors are blocked. Those are what are on the cells that receive the insulin and bring it into the system. So, lots of problems with animal fat, and that creates insulin resistance that exhausts the beta cells of the pancreas. So, animal fat is a big player. Now, insulin resistance, and this takes you in the medical field, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but it's defined by having a high insulin level. So the pancreas pushing and pushing, you know, the cells and the muscles and the liver are resisting. So more and more insulin, pretty soon it gets worn out. If you have an insulin between above 10, that means you have insulin resistance. So it's a fasting insulin. It's it's a blood in the morning before you eat. If it's greater than 10, we already are entering insulin resistance. Now I'm giving you kind of very functional letters, and they actually give you more leeway. They talk about 20 or so, but really 10. Less than 2 means you have a low insulin production. Okay, so we'll see that type 1 diabetics will often have an insulin production of less than 2. By certain herbs, which probably won't be available to most people, to be honest here, but certain herbs can regenerate the beta cells of the pancreas. I've had people come in with insulin of 1.2, and 6 months later the insulin is 5. So we can regenerate the beta cells, but that's money and it's special herbs and so forth. Now there are problems. When you go into insulin resistance, you do increase your rate of getting cancer, okay? And you increase your rate of aging. So diets that are high in sugar and saturated animal fats are two of the big causes of type 2 diabetes and ages. And ages, it's an important term to get, is when sugar combines unnaturally with protein. And we see it with when we measure A1C, which is glycosylated hemoglobin. It's a blood test, and a glycosylated hemoglobin of 5.7 or more is a sign of prediabetes, between 5.7 and 6.4. Above 6.4 and A1C, glycosylated hemoglobin, means you have diabetes. Between 5.7 and 6.4 is pre-diabetics. Okay? Now another thing that we see, and this is more in men, is that men tend to develop breasts. So what's going on? Well, what's going on is insulin's being converted to estrogen, and also plant-based diets have lower estrogen. So meat-based diets have more estrogen, and so you have more of a feminization going on in that. And high estrogen increases the rate of diabetes. You want to have high fiber, you want to have antioxidants, increased amount that protect you against free radicals, which free radicals inflame the system. We were talking about diabetes is an increased inflammation that accelerates aging. Okay? So you get higher antioxidants with a plant-based diet and less inflammation. Now, with meat, we have high levels of leucine and methionine. These are amino acids, and leucine is specifically toxic to the beta cells of the pancreas. Now, that is worth understanding. So, Besides animal fat, leucine, which you get from meat, fish, chicken, and dairy, actually destroys the beta cells. And second to that is methionine. These are amino acids that are from animal protein. Doesn't seem to happen from plant protein. I don't know exactly why. We just know that the science shows it happens with animal protein because leucine is much higher in an animal protein. That's the key thing. So a plant-based diet plus estrogen, and it's a little bit easier to follow, and it's way less expensive. Okay? So I'm repeating, but I want you to get it. A meat-based diet, meat, fish, chicken, and dairy, increase the rate of diabetes, of type 2 diabetes, by 35 to 50%. Now that's pretty straightforward. Okay? This is all based on studies with about 1.25 million people, so it's huge, important to understand. Okay? Now, they found that when people ate meat, and they followed them for 17,000 people for 12 years, again, there was an increase in diabetes. And I don't want to have too many statistics here, but there was an 8% increase for every 50 grams. That's 1.75 ounces of meat per day. So, we know that saturated fats, animal fat, trans fats are found naturally in cooked meat because that's what the cooked fats do. They become trans fats. We have increase in animal protein, which gives us an excess of leucine, which destroys the beta cells of the pancreas. The iron in the meat, which people maybe think it's a good idea, creates free radicals, creates inflammation. So that's the key. Ages, which we call, and I'm just giving you the term, but ages is a lot easier to remember, okay, is advanced glycation end products. And that really just means it's an inflammation, and it's where fructose or glucose are combined with protein, particularly at your DNA level. So chronic inflammation is the driving force behind type 2 diabetes. Eating white sugar, glucose, fructose, and animal meat, protein, and fat are the dietary forces behind that. The inflammation we're talking about has been measured. I don't expect you to memorize all this, but they've been able to measure inflammatory markers, tumor necrosis factor, C-reactive protein, and vascular adhesion molecules. Now, the point I'm making, I just want you to get that inflammation is measured. It's just not a term. It's measurable. We measure it. The researchers measured it. And these things increase inflammation. Okay? And ages increase the inflammation. So those are key things. Again, I'm going to emphasize leucine burns out the insulin-producing beta cells. Not really a good idea, and that's what it's much higher in animal protein. A plant-based vegan diet will lower the leucine levels, okay? And lower leucine levels are associated with decreased diabetes and increased longevity. So, to get as much leucine you get from meat, you'd have to eat 9 pounds of cabbage or 100 apples a day. That would be pretty hard work. So that gives you an idea. So I mentioned industrial pollutants. That's a big thing. And what we know is the pesticides, herbicides, industrial pollutants are higher in animal flesh. About 95% end up in animal fat and animal flesh. So, now, what I'm sharing with you really isn't new. We've had research on this going back 50 years. So this is not new information, except in the medical schools, they're a little slow to understand these things, okay? The more meat people eat, the higher rates of diabetes. And people who eat plant-based have much lower rates of diabetes. It's as simple as that. Now, you say, well, what if I eat a little bit of meat? Okay, they even did research on that. It's really interesting, okay? The difference between eating 3% meat or no meat is actually significant. Women who, this is a study with Buddhist vegetarians and Buddhist non-vegetarians, and they found that women who had generally had a single serving of meat, that's 3% of their diet a week, one serving per week, and men who had 2 servings per week had significantly more rates of diabetes. The vegetarian women had 1/4 the rate of diabetes as compared to the woman that ate meat 1 time a week. That's pretty significant. And the men, they had 2 servings a week, and that's about 8% of what most people eat with meat. And they had half the rate of diabetes. So those are very important statistics. So even a little bit makes a difference. Okay? So red meat consumption, beef, pork, lamb, and I'm going to say fish in there, do make a difference, do increase the rate of diabetes because they create chronic inflammation. They also increase higher rates of colon cancer, atherosclerosis, heart attacks. As I said, 75% of people with type 2 diabetes will die of heart attacks. And of course, obviously, chronic inflammation drives diabetes. So, meat of all kinds increases inflammation and the rate of aging and inflammation. So, these are the things. I'm repeating it because by the third time you're going to remember it a little bit. Organic pollutants are 95 to 96% higher in meat. Meat itself contains advanced glycation end products, which increases inflammation. And now they're even finding that there's a certain factor in meat, NEU5GC, which makes people form antibodies and creates inflammation. So, summing it up with meat and diabetes, when I mean meat, I mean red meat, but I also mean fish and chicken. It's high in saturated fats. It's acidic. And people who are acidic had a 56% increased rates of type 2 diabetes. And acidic, you can measure it by first urine in the morning. It needs to be normal between 6.4 and 7.2. If it's less than that, you're acidic. Meat consumption increases insulin resistance, big problem. Meat consumption has ages, particularly if it's baked, grilled, fried. All of that will increase your rate of getting diabetes. And meat is higher in estrogen, and we know that high estrogen tends to stimulate diabetes. Now, really want to make a point. We used to think fish was the most healthy food, and I understand that's really not it now. In Europe, fish eaters appear to have a 38% increase in diabetes because fish fat is the most toxic to the beta cells of the pancreas. And if you just had 1 serving a day per week of fish, you're increasing your rate of diabetes by 5%. So that means if you have fish every single day, you will increase your rate of diabetes by 35%. Meat increases the rate of diabetes by about 19% if you're doing it every day. So even the fish oils have been associated with increased rates of blood sugars. So it's a problem. We want to do plant-based omega-3, long-chain omega-3s. So what we get is if people are having fish 2 or more times a week, it definitely decreases the function of the beta cells. So even though with meat, fish, chicken, and dairy, you have all that, fish is the most diabetes producing. Just get that. Fish is the most type 2 diabetes producing flesh food. okay? And even the omega-3 fish oils will increase your rate it will increase your blood sugar. So, 2 helpings per week of fish decreases beta cell function. So, that's the key to understand. We used to think fish is the most healthy food, and it turns out to be it's the worst for diabetes. Okay. So I'm summarizing again, and I am being repetitive, okay, because really want you to get it. Excess glucose and fructose, animal fat, animal protein, all increase the rates of getting diabetes. That's what we really have to get. Now let's look at eggs. People think eggs are the most perfect food, but actually 1 egg a week increases the rate of diabetes in men and women by 76%. 1 egg per day doubles it. 2 eggs per week also doubles it. And if you're going to have an egg a day, you're egging on diabetes. I don't like to make too many puns because of the Spanish and Portuguese translations. But an egg a day shortens people's lifespan. Now, lifestyle is important. Sleep happens to be extremely important. We really need to get between 7 and 8 hours of sleep, and that will helps a little protection against diabetes. If you go to 6 hours or 5 hours sleep for a few days in a row, it will increase your fasting blood sugar. First, that's your blood sugar first thing in the morning before you've eaten. It does really do it. Brushing your teeth seems simple, but 65% of the people with diabetes will have gum infections, and those gum infections can affect heart function as well. Now here you see an interesting process. This is World War I, this is World War II. So when sugar was cut down, that's blue, the rate of diabetes, deaths decreased too. So there's a direct relationship between less sugar and less people dying from diabetes. That's World War I, that's World War II. And this is this book, this came out in 1975, and it's called The Saccharine Disease by Dr. Thomas Cleve. So that was where everybody said it's got to be sugar, and then we forgot about the animal protein and animal fat. Soft drinks, it's a huge problem. So let's talk about that. Artificial sweeteners are worse than just sugar in the soft drinks. So we have soft drinks, and we have artificial sweeteners, sucrose, aspartame, saccharin. They all cause diabetes rather than prevent it because they disrupt our normal bacteria in our bowel. So people, and this is the study of over 3,000 people, they showed basically if people eat the artificial sweeteners, they're going to have trouble with their sugar management. So, saccharin is another big problem. So here's what the research shows. I make a joke, diabetes. So they did a study, 14-year study, 66,000 people. It's a big study. 1 can of soda per week increases the rate of type 2 diabetes by 33%. 2 cans of soda per week increases the rate of diabetes by 50%. So diet soda, 1.5 cans of diet soda, actually increases the rate of diabetes by 15% more than just the sugar in it. So women who had diet soda, 50 ounces of soda weekly, which isn't all that much, they increased the rate of getting type 2 diabetes by 60% compared to regular soda drinkers who are drinking 50 ounces of soda. So diet soda is worse. That's the key. And the worst is aspartame. So the research also shows that regular soda drinkers are 10 times more likely to get type 2 diabetes. So soda is really not a good idea. And diet soda is a worse idea. Okay? So that's really the key. Here's a study of 25,000 people for 11 years. These are big studies. They're really hard to debate. And so for every 5% increase in calories from sugar drinks, the risk of type 2 diabetes increases by 18%. If you decrease everything by one drink a day, there'll be a 25% decrease in diabetes. So what we're learning here is drinking soda, whether it's diet soda or regular soda, really is a problem, and we have a definite increase in diabetes. And here it's 22%. People had 1 ounce of sugar soda per day. Now, antibiotics are a problem, but there's a specific class of antibiotics, and this gets a little technical, but I want to make the point. And these antibiotics are called fluoroquinolones. Now, you're not a pharmacologist, I understand. I'm just saying, they have names. Avalox, Levaquin, Cypro. That whole class will definitely increase your rate of getting diabetes. And that's the key thing. So if you have too many antibiotics in general, however, over 15 years, if you have 5 treatments over 15 years, you are going to get a 50% increase in diabetes. So, and if you just have 2 to 4 treatments of antibiotics over that time, there's a 23% increase in getting diabetes. So we are really talking about, this is a problem. And so be very careful with the antibiotics. And different foods stimulate what we call insulin release. And what's interesting here is you look at brown rice and white rice, they're going to increase glucose over insulin release. When we go to beef and yogurt and fish, it's just the opposite. They actually increase excess insulin release, which is associated with increased amount of, obviously, diabetes really, but also cancer, particularly cancer of the stomach, and also heart disease. These are the problems we get with type 2 diabetes. Loss of vision, retinopathy, destruction of the neurological system, neuropathy, nephropathy, which is kidney destruction, atherosclerosis, depression, poor digestion, and actually increased rates of Alzheimer's disease. Literally, we double the rate of Alzheimer's disease with diabetes. So what are we saying? We're going to sum it up, because it's always good to sum it up. We have 10 times, with diabetics, 10 times more death from cirrhosis of the liver, 100% increase in suicide, and suicide for diabetic men was double that of non-diabetics. Suicide for diabetic women was about 50% higher. And death from alcohol is 70% higher in men and 110% higher in women. So, your help, it can save people's lives. That's how important your job is. If you give them a really good advice and they follow it, you are saving people's lives. Okay? Now, for every 10 years people had diabetes, type 2, the brain was 2 years older than a non-diabetic. And the higher your fasting blood sugar is, the more the brain decreases in size. Okay? The longer you have diabetes, the greater chance of a risk for dementia, Alzheimer's. So the brain size of diabetics decreased twice as fast as of non-diabetics. So really, people with type 2 diabetes do lose mental function and basically brain functions. So, what's normal? Normal fasting blood sugar is 70 to 85. And above 86, you have an increased rate of heart disease and diabetes and cancer. Now, non-diabetic is 100 or less, but optimal is 70 to 85. So, just so you know that. This is what it looks like when you do a glucose tolerance test, which you won't be doing, but it peaks. So on a glucose tolerance test, if you are above 180, it's a sign of maybe diabetes. Here's another sign. This is what we call prediabetes. There's a spike because you get a sugar thing and then boom, it spikes up because your pancreas is very slow in secreting insulin. So if your blood sugar is averaging above 110, the beta cells of the pancreas, which produce insulin, start to die. Okay? And fructose is a big player in associated causing diabetes. You take fructose, it doesn't raise your blood sugar right away, but it causes many other problems. It is not safer. When they introduced fructose in the 1980s, and they measured the result of diabetes from 1980 to 1997, there's a 2,100% increase in diabetes. So it's a problem. They really create ages, advanced glycation in products. It's 10 times more active than glucose in creating these. And cancer cells of the pancreas really, really love fructose 10 times more, and 10 times more inflammation in the brain. It's a big deal. So fructose disrupts the leptin insulin signaling. So fructose causes a problem not directly, but indirectly by all these disruptions. That's the key thing. And fructose doesn't turn off the appetite. There's a hormone that controls appetite, ghrelin. And glucose will actually say, okay, I'm full, stop. It secretes ghrelin and stops. Fructose doesn't do that. Okay? And so it blocks also the leptin signal to stop eating. So these are big things. We have to advise our people to stay away from fructose. It is not safer. You can have 15, 25 grams of, like a banana or 2 a day, a kiwi, things like that. But you want to minimize it. Okay? And that's the key. So excess fructose, which everybody thinks is harmless, increases not only chronic diabetes degenerative syndrome, insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, these are all terms around diabetes, but it increases heart disease, high blood pressure, obesity, gout, kidney stones, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, brain inflammation, cancer, accelerated aging, and ages. So fructose is not your friend, and knowing that, you're empowered to tell people to avoid it. Okay, so we're really looking at this whole program, which is how do we turn off this epigenetic program that is the driving toxic force that creates the diabetes. And it works pretty well. These are people in our 3-week program. You see here's almost up to a fasting blood sugar of 370, and as soon as they hit our program, it goes to normal. Here's a person up to as much as 300, and it goes number in our program. So the program works. This is mostly diet. This is the program at the Tree of Life. It's a program we are also doing in Brazil. Mostly it's going to be in Sao Paulo. And hopefully we'll begin soon in Israel, which serves all of Europe and really Africa. We get a lot of people from Africa going to Israel. It's not that far away, particularly with Ethiopian Airlines. But you can see how this works. Drops it pretty quickly. This is type 2 diabetes. Doesn't matter what age. You can drop it on this using nutrition. 76-year-old doesn't, you're not too old. Oldest client I had was 92. She came in a wheelchair. She had high blood pressure. She had type 2 diabetes. 2 weeks later, she's out of the wheelchair. She's walking around, and her blood sugar is normal, and she no longer has hypertension. 92. I saw her a year later in New York City, and she was just great. So, please understand age is not an issue here. At any age, you can turn this around and get rid of the diabetes. Okay? And this is just a blood sugar thing. What we're looking at is people came with an average blood sugar of around 247 in our program. And after really 3 to 4 weeks, their blood sugar was down to 86. It can be done. That's my message. Inflammation can drop 3-fold. Here it runs around 16, and in 3 weeks it's down to 5. It's pretty exciting. So we're concluding now with the diet. This is a diet that's sprouts and leafy greens and vegetables, sea vegetables, which are kelp and nori. You can have avocados, you can have tomatoes, cucumbers, bell peppers, all the different oils you want, but the better oils are your omega-3 oils, the hemp oil and the other nuts and seeds, but all those are good for what we're doing. You want the green powders, spirulina, chlorella. A lot of that's not so available, but if you can do it, it makes a difference. Fermented foods are good. Kimchi and seed milk, sauerkrauts are all really good. The sweeteners that people can use are stevia and xylitol, so people can have sweeteners. That's really important. Legumes are good, and we kind of tend to minimize caffeine. Once you're healed, then you can add grains into the diet. And that's a key, and a little bit of fruit. Particularly, you can do goji berries and pomegranates, a little bee pollen, maca, blueberries, bilberries, and green apples. So I just want to point out in our 3-week program how well people do. They went from 247 in 3 weeks to 86. That's better than any other programs that are out there, but it can be done. That's my point. Okay? Dropped 161 points in fasting blood sugar. Average weight loss is 18. And 97% of the people who are type 1 and type 2 diabetic were off all medications. 97% were off all their diabetic medications, including insulin. Type 2 diabetics not on insulin, 61% were healed in 3 weeks. 24% on insulin were off their insulin and healed in 3 weeks. Pretty exciting. Here's the summary. We want to avoid all carbohydrates except leafy greens, non-starchy and fibrous vegetables, sprouts, and sea vegetables. Okay? So that's a diet that's 25-35% carbohydrate. Okay? 25 to 45% raw plant fat, 10 to 20% raw plant protein, depending on your constitution. So we're dropping the carbohydrates, we're dropping the grains, we're dropping the sugars, we're dropping the sweets. We're doing vegetables and avocados and that kind of thing, and sprouts. That's the diet that works. So if you go 100% live food, which not everybody's going to do, it's very, very powerful for healing diabetes. And when you're using live food, it decreases inflammation significantly, because the results you saw was a 3-fold decrease in inflammation in 3 to 4 weeks. Remember, the inflammation is the driving force behind type 2 diabetes. There's a lot of weight loss that happens, people coming to their normal weights, a lot of diabetics are overweight, and losing weight decreases leptin and the inflammatory cytokines, all of which improve your overall health and protect you from diabetes. So that's your plant source only diet in the Bible, Genesis 1:29, that's what it says. Okay? That's the diet that's recommended. So maybe we knew about diabetes at that time. And God was just telling us, here's the diet to protect you from diabetes. All organic food is important because the pesticides and herbicides disrupt the beta cells of the pancreas. Moderate exercise, I mentioned, and that's walking fast about for 30 minutes, like 4 times a week. Adequate sleep, really getting between 7 and 8 hours sleep a day, a night, I mean. Meditating, prayer, these all really make a difference. And your diet has to be individualized to your constitution. Some people need a little bit more protein, a little bit less. This diet drops your cholesterol to normal, but the key here is you want a cholesterol around 160 at the lowest. You don't want to go lower than that because of problems of low cholesterol. Okay? And this is so important as teachers here, getting people to love themselves enough to want to heal themselves. And the understanding with the quote by the great American poet Ralph Waldo Emerson, society is always taken by surprise by any new example of common sense. Okay, there's the book. There's a Cure for Diabetes. It has all this laid out in great detail, and it's translated into Portuguese and also Spanish. So these are some of the books I've written, and people can get the products from us, but really the key is your diet and your lifestyle. So may you be blessed in understanding this, that you are empowered to go out into the world and educate people to prevent them from getting diabetes, or if they do, even reversing it. And understand that the people's results by education is very, very, very powerful. You are actually saving people's lives. So may you be blessed with this information. Amen.